Hi, I'm Samuel Duro, and this is my neighbor Dave. How old were you at the time of the 50s and 60s?
Well, in 1969, I was 14 years old.
Where were you living at the time?
I was living at 51st and Fairfield in Gage Park, 5127 South Fairfield.
What were you doing at the time?
I was a student. When I was 14, I was a freshman at Brother Rice.
What was your favorite sport to play?
I played baseball for 3 years at Brother Rice and then 4 years at St. Xavier.
Did you do any other sports?
Not in high school or college, but afterwards, yeah, I played basketball, I played football, I played a little bit of hockey, I played floor hockey. I dabbled in all the sports.
What do you remember about Martin Luther King?
Well, I just remember he was a spokesperson for the civil rights movement for the black people. He was their number one spokesperson.
What did you think about Martin Luther King?
I really had no opinion of him because I was 14 years old. I was, or 13 years old at the time he got killed. So I really didn't pay attention to the whole civil rights movement. I would see it on television and everything like that, but it never affected me. So I never really got into what it was all about till I got older in life, and then I learned about Martin Luther King and everything.
Mm. What did you think of the riots after his death?
I think it was very unfortunate because here on the west side of Chicago, I mean, they rioted and they burnt down all of their own businesses where they shopped all the time. They burnt down their, all their car dealerships, and they burnt down their grocery stores and drugstores. And I mean, to me, didn't make too much sense.
What did you think of the Children's March?
The Children's March?
Yeah.
What's the Children's March?
The Children's March was when they sent, when the black children went on a riot or something like that.
Don't know anything about it.
Did you join any of the riots?
No.
Did you or your family admire Martin Luther King?
No.
What was your opinion on the civil rights movement?
Well, I think it was something that was long overdue. I mean, it was going to happen sooner or later. You fight a war in 1860, and 100 years later, in 1960, you're still being, discriminated against. I mean, something had to be done, and it was done.
Yep. What do you remember about the Jim Crow laws?
Well, other than the fact that, blacks weren't allowed to eat in white restaurants, go to drink out of white water fountains, socialize with whites. I mean, that's what I knew. I mean, but it never affected me up here. I mean, I was living in Chicago. I wasn't living down south where those Jim Crow laws are really taking effect. I mean, I was a Chicago kid. So up here, I mean, to me, at that time, there was nothing like that.
Do you think they were okay or not okay?
Oh, they were definitely not okay. I mean, they were definitely not okay. And it should have been taken care of 100 years earlier, but it never was. It was a problem that lasted, over 100 years. And we're still discriminating against people, not only blacks, but Hispanics and everybody else.
What was your favorite car at the time?
My favorite car probably was the Mustang, because that was like the first muscle car that Ford came out with, and a friend of mine had one. So just when I was 16 and 17, he would let me drive it. We would go down to the lake, and we'd hop in his '64 Mustang, and we'd drive down to the lake. And yeah, I thought it was a pretty cool car. To this day, it still is pretty cool.
What was your first car?
My first car was a 1974 Chevy Impala. I bought it used in whatever year it was. I bought it in 1978. I bought a used 1974 Chevy Impala.
Do you remember anything about the Apollo 7 mission?
No, not at all.
Do you remember anything of the moon landing?
No, I knew that President Kennedy promised that we would be in space by the end of the 60s, and we were. We went up in space in 1969. But again, during that time, I was in high school, so I mean, I wasn't really paying attention to what was happening on the moon or anything like that. I mean, I was too busy doing my high school stuff.
What did you think of John F. Kennedy?
Well, I mean, at the time I was young, but now that I've read about him and learned about him, I mean, like I say, he was our first Catholic president. He had to deal with some difficult issues with Cuba, and the Soviet Union at the time. He had to deal with civil rights when the governor of Alabama didn't want to let blacks in the University of Alabama. He had to send the National Guard in. I mean, he had to deal with some difficult times, and unfortunately, he was assassinated, 3 years into his term. So how good of a president he would ever be, we'll never know. We can only speculate.
Talking about his assassination, where were you when he was shot?
I was sitting in third grade classroom at Five Holy Martyrs on 43rd and Francisco in Brighton Park.
What do you think of Oswald, the shooter?
Well, I mean, I'm not too much into conspiracies, but I don't know if this guy could have done that all by himself. I mean, it's just, now that I've learned things and I've seen things on the History Channel with the rifle he had, a bolt-action rifle. They had a Marine sharpshooter try and enact the same thing that Oswald did to see if he could get 3 shots off in that amount of time, and the guy couldn't do it. So, I mean, I don't know what Oswald, how he could do it, he was a ways away from Kennedy. So, I mean, I think there's more to the story, and will we ever know? I don't know.
What do you think about Jack Ruby killing Oswald?
Yeah, again, that's another part of that conspiracy. I mean, there's something doesn't it doesn't seem right. I mean, that all of the way this thing's turned out, everything that happened, something's not right. Was there, like I say, was there a conspiracy? Was Ruby and Oswald, and I don't know. I mean, there's just too many coincidences in this whole thing. So I don't know, and hopefully we might find out one day. Who knows? But we had the Warren Commission that investigated this, and they're saying there was no conspiracy. They said Oswald acted alone. So, I mean, do we believe them? Again, that's up to you.
What, were you afraid of communism?
No, not at all.
How did you feel about the Red Scare?
Yeah, like I say, it never affected me. I was living here in Chicago, just doing my thing. The Red Scare it really never scared me.
What were your thoughts on the nuclear race?
Well, like I say, I mean, I didn't know too much about the nuclear race at the time. Like I say, other than the fact that the United States was the only one that ever used a nuclear weapon up until that time. I know us and the Soviet Union at the time. I mean, that was the arms race between us and them. Who could have more nuclear weapons. China wasn't involved at the time. I mean, they were still like a third world country. So they were, Pakistan wasn't involved, or India wasn't involved at the time. It was just us and the Soviet Union. And it is what it is.
Did you see any propaganda?
I never saw any type of propaganda.
Did you know anyone in the Vietnam War?
I had a good friend of mine that was in the Vietnam War. He was in Vietnam for a year. And fortunately, he came back alive, and he's living to this day.
Were you involved in the Vietnam War?
No, I was not, because I was always in school.
Were you involved in any naval or army business?
No.
What were your thoughts on the Vietnam War?
I think it was one of the biggest mistakes this country ever did. It was a disaster right from the beginning because we had no type of plan to win the war. The way they wanted to win the war changed 3 different times during 10 years. 58,000 kids got killed for no reason. I mean, it was just a disaster, and this country should be ashamed of themselves for that. It really is. It's a black eye for our country.
Okay. Do you see any protests, or
Well,
were you involved?
I wasn't involved, but I did see them. You know, I saw them firsthand when I was downtown Chicago. I saw the National Guard and the hippies protesting and the police down there, and I was in front of the Conrad Hilton. I was 14 years old, and I was watching. It was pretty cool at the time. You know, I kind of like scared, you know, because I was right in the middle of all this, and I was just a kid. I was your age, man. You know, I mean, it was something that I'll never forget. But yeah, I was there.
What do you think? What was the biggest mistake that you think President Nixon made?
Well, that he lied, you know. I mean, when you're a president, you know, you shouldn't lie to the people. But he lied, he got caught doing it, and it ultimately it led to his resignation. And yeah, don't lie to people. It's not a good thing.
What was your first job?
I was a paper boy for the Chicago American.
Did you like your first job?
It was fine, yeah. Hopped on my bike every day after school and delivered the papers.
What was your favorite type of music?
The music I had was, at that time, was rock and roll, top 40. The British invasion was 1964. I was 10 years old when the Beatles came over from England. And yeah, from then on, I was just all rock and roll. To this day, that's what I listen to.
Who was your hero?
My hero was Mickey Mantle, outfielder for the New York Yankees, because at that time I was playing baseball and I was a Yankee fan. And he was one of the best players ever in the history of the game. And even at that time, he was the best player. But now in history, he's one of the best players that ever played a game.
Okay. Did you have a TV, and what TV shows did you like?
Yeah, we had a black and white TV, which I'm sure you never saw, a black and white TV.
No.
Yeah. Yeah, we had a black and white TV, and we watched what was on at the time. I used to watch, like, you know, the Beverly Hillbillies, Get Smart, Bewitched, Petticoat Junction, All in the Family when I got to be in high school. Just a regular stuff that was on at the time.
What trends did you follow?
Well, the only trends we followed was, you know, the long hair thing came into vogue in the 60s because it was the hippie movement. So the hippies all had long hair. The only bad thing for me, I was in high school and you couldn't have long hair. When I was in college, I couldn't have long hair because I played baseball, so they made us cut it. So, I mean, that was the one thing until I graduated college that I couldn't grow my hair. But that was the big thing. And then just the clothing, you know, the bell-bottom shoes, or bell-bottom pants, you know, stuff like that, tie-dye shirts, you know.
How are schools different than now?
The schools were different from then till now. The main thing is, first of all, there were more kids in the schools. And I was at Brother Rice, I think we had 2,200 kids. We had mobile classrooms outside. I mean, it was big. And at Brother Rice, like I say, I mean, you messed up, you got punished, I mean, physically. I mean, I got slapped in the face, I got beat with a gym shoe. And that was it. You didn't go home and tell your parents because they would say, hey, good for you, you deserved it. If the teacher hit you, you deserved it. You know, nowadays a teacher hits you, you know, he's being arrested, or he doesn't hit you because he's afraid to get arrested.
What did you think about pastors and churches that differ from now?
Well, at that time I was an altar boy. I was at St. Simon on 51st in California. So, I mean, I was a Catholic and growing up in that whole Catholic thing. And now that I see the way this Catholic Church, you know, with these priests, with these pedophilia lawsuits and everything like that, and I see just a cardinal from Australia is going on trial now for pedophilia. Now I think it's disgusting. I mean, I'm even ashamed to say that I'm a Catholic right now.
What was your favorite memory of the time?
Well, it was just a more simpler time. You know, things were much more simple. It wasn't complicated. You didn't walk out of your house with a cell phone in your pocket. You know, you didn't walk out. I mean, you didn't check your computer all the time. You didn't have a computer. You know, you didn't have no technology. So I mean, it was a much simpler time. You just went out, you did your thing, you came home, you went to sleep, you got up, you did the thing, you know, the next day. I mean, it was just a much happier time.
If you could change one thing from your era, what would it be?
You know, I don't know if I change anything. I mean, it was a happy time. I mean, there was crime, but I was never really a victim of it or anyone in my neighborhood. I wasn't worried about growing up in my neighborhood about being burglarized or beat up or anything like that. It was just, I'm sure, like I say, I'm sure there was crime around, but it never affected me.
Well, this ends our interview, and this is Dave, and I'm Samuel.